Governor Andrew Cuomo finally resigned, and now everybody's piling on. He was horrible. He was toxic. It was the worst place to work in the world, and we just figured it out. Come on, people. Anybody who worked in Albany, anybody who worked for the governor, anybody in politics knew what Andrew Cuomo was for years. So why didn't anybody say anything, and why does it matter? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called That Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what you're talking about.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says your headings, I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks for watching, engaging. As always, love your comments, your interaction. We pop them up on the screen. We talk through as many of them as we can. I like to go back and forth. You guys can't literally talk to me, but you can talk at me. I can comment, respond, and of course, you guys can have a meta conversation with each other. So a couple things I want to dive into today. The first one is Governor Andrew Cuomo. Now, I've said for a while, for those of you who don't know, Governor Cuomo resigned the other day as governor of New York. I've been saying for a long time, Governor Cuomo needed to go. First of all, you know, it took a long time, right? And Governor Cuomo was defiant to the end. It took an investigation by the Attorney General of New York, a Democrat, Letitia James. They interviewed 179 people. They had 2 outside lawyers doing it. And the conclusion was that the Governor Cuomo not only had a toxic work environment, but that he groped, kissed, and made suggestive comments, sexually suggestive comments to 11 different women, creating a hostile work environment. And for this, Andrew Cuomo finally had to step down. Now, by the way, didn't step down just because they accused him of that. He denied it right up to the end. He said it was politically motivated. He said it was cancel culture. Sound familiar? Sound like a Republican who used to be president named Trump? Funny how they all use the same defense. But he finally resigned, and he only resigned because he literally had nowhere else to go. I mean, every major Democrat, national level, Biden, Speaker of the House Pelosi, the Majority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, the Republican delegation, Democratic delegation, and the Republicans, of course, in New York, the congressional delegation, and like 2/3 of the New York Assembly and State Senate were like, we will impeach you. We're going to move for articles of impeachment. 2 criminal investigations were started. I mean, at a certain point, he had nowhere to go, which ruined Andrew Cuomo is an ambitious man. His father was governor of New York and for 3 terms, and Andrew Cuomo was a 3rd-term governor planning on running for a 4th term next year. Would have been, I think, other than Nelson Rockefeller, the only person to run. There's no term limits in New York. And a wildly ambitious man, was not, and a fighter, not easy for him to step down, but he had nowhere to go. They were going to impeach him, and the writing was on the wall. He lost all political support. And like I said, the Democratic legislature, the Assembly and the Senate were like, we're going to impeach you. So, you can quit. It's kind of the Nixon way back in the day after Watergate. Nixon, it was kind of like, well, they did impeach Nixon, but they were going to convict him. So it's sort of like, you can quit or we'll boot you out of office. And Cuomo finally just said, okay, I quit, preserving his ability to run again, which, don't get me wrong, he will. But here's the question. So people like me have been saying for a year, that Andrew Cuomo should resign. And by the way, I acknowledged at the beginning of the pandemic how great I thought Andrew Cuomo was in sort of taking the decisive action in New York. I like strong leaders in that way. I think, people who are decisive make decisions. I thought he was doing a good job in a difficult time, contrasting him to, say, Governor Newsom in California, who I thought was doing a train wreck of a job. And Trump, who I thought as president wasn't doing a very good job at all at kind of unifying, leading the country, or keeping us on track. But Andrew Cuomo, and I said this in an episode months ago, Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump are far more alike than different. They're highly ambitious, highly ruthless, and egos larger than the planet, and skin thinner than, I don't know, I'm not good at analogies, but thinner than rice paper. I don't know. And everything's personal. Everything's taken personally. But here's the thing that I want to get to, and a number of ways I want to go into what happened with Andrew Cuomo. But there's so many layers to this, and an angle why it matters in how people responded. But on the face of it, the accusations against Andrew Cuomo for the sexual harassment were from so many different people, and they were so consistent, and they were all people. Some may have had motives, political motives, but at the end of the day, they were all people who were Democrats who'd worked for him, worked closely with him. They were not political opponents on the face of it. It was not a Brett Kavanaugh and Dr. Blasey Ford where she clearly was a hardcore liberal and hated Republicans and was going after Kavanaugh. But remember when Kavanaugh was being, his hearings to be a Supreme Court justice, people were coming out of the woodwork accusing him of stuff, literally. I mean, Dr. Ford's was the first, and she couldn't remember exactly when it happened. Fair enough. It was a long time ago. She couldn't remember the day. She couldn't remember the place. She couldn't remember anything about it, except that it was him. And she didn't even know him. She'd never met him before that and never met him after, but she knew it was him. Her best friend at the time was at the party with her where it supposedly happened, though she couldn't remember the date or the exact place. Never told her best friend about it. Best friend didn't know anything about it. Now, I'm not saying something didn't happen to Dr. Ford. I think something did. But how she knew it was this guy, Brett Kavanaugh, who she'd never met before, supposedly at this party, I don't know. But that was a credible accusation in the eyes of the media, the Me Too movement, Time's Up. They ran with it. And then they ran with every single accusation after it, every single one. Right down to that Kavanaugh was part of gang raping people. And the media piled on and piled on and piled on. With Governor Cuomo, they literally took a step back with every accusation, despite the fact that they were highly credible accusations with a high degree of specificity from people who worked closely with him. And as I said, didn't have agendas. In some cases, they may have said they had agendas now, but they were allies with the governor. And yet the media sidestepped, barely reported them, and then only reported them when they couldn't any longer. And even when the Attorney General's report came out from New York, a Democrat also, sidebar, she has a political agenda because I think she wants to run for governor, but she's also a Democrat, was to mention it and then let it go away. Even Democratic leaders who criticized him after the report came out, they'd say it and then they'd walk away. The media dropped the ball as fast as they could, barely picked it up, except for Fox News, of course, but barely picked it up. So clearly there is on the face of it a politicization around sexual accusations, which I get, by the way. It was on the other end of this years ago when Bill Clinton was impeached, and I was at Stanford and I was working in the White House at that time. And, Clinton, the Republicans went after Clinton. What he did with Monica Lewinsky was not okay at all. I mean, he was the president and she was an intern. But at the same time, the Republicans weaponized it to get him. It wasn't really in their eyes about what he did. It was a way to go after the president and bring him down. And people inside the White House told me that. They were like, the president gave them a loaded gun and pointed it at himself. That's what politicians do. I get it. They're going to go after you with whatever they can. What's scary to me is the way the public and the media have now bought into that mindset. I get politicians will use whatever they can against the other party. They'll weaponize it against the other side. And then when it's weaponized against them, they'll cry foul. And both sides will do it. That's politics. It always has been. That's not new. That's not recent. That's not a product of cancel culture or big tech. That's been around since the beginning of time. And certainly in America, since the revolution. But the fact that the media and the public has bought into that weaponization is something that is in a sense newer. And the idea that we don't even realize that there's a double standard going on. Time's Up Me Too, both were important, raised, brought to light. Ronan Farrow's reporting, I mean, like literally separate from Me Too and Time's Up, but I mean, calling out the abusive sort of sexual predator relationship of these powerful men in Hollywood, in politics, needed to happen. But Hollywood was never really about Me Too. It was about hurting conservatives, Republicans, people who weren't liberal. And that's why they piled on when it was a conservative and were silent when it was Democrats. Whether it was a lieutenant governor of Virginia, even on the race side, when it was Governor Northam, with wearing either one of the two. He was the picture of him. He was in years ago. He was in either dressed as a Ku Klux Klan member. It was two bad choices. He was a Ku Klux Klan member, or he was in blackface. It was like one of the two. And the media is sort of dropping it. But to the Me Too thing, Me Too Time's Up, Me Too Time's Up, we're all about survivors, go protecting women, the survivors of sexual assault, harassment. But they never were about it when it was the other side. The lone voice in this really, was, on the one side you had Alyssa McGowan, on the other side you had Rose McGowan, and wrote both from Charmed back in the day. Rose McGowan to this day has said, why aren't you consistent? Who cares what party they're in? Who cares what their politics are? If they're doing this, call them out. She's gone after Time's Up, after Me Too, after Alyssa Milano saying, you should see the tweet she wrote, after this one with Cuomo, like, you are the biggest hypocrites on the planet. You are performative. You have no interest in really stopping. You're not really about the survivors of sexual assault. You're about weaponizing and politicizing this to take down the people you don't like. And you are crickets when it comes to the people you do like. And only when forced, finally, after endless revelations, after countless people coming out with credible evidence, a huge report by a Democratic attorney general in the state, and politicians left and right, mostly left though, Democrats, including the president, calling for Cuomo to resign. Only then does Me Too Time's Up say this is bad. Like, in fact, it's worse than that, in that Roberta Kaplan, who is like one of the co-founders or on the board of Time's Up, actually is a lawyer, actually was given a draft op-ed to review from the governor's office, which was going to discredit Lindsey Boland, one of the earliest and most credible and sort of determined accusers. Been saying it for over a year and a half that he did this stuff. And she was a top level aide to him, dismissed again by the media. On the advisory board, a prominent member of Time's Up, Roberta Kaplan, reviewing the letter that the governor was going to publish. They decided not to discredit the woman who claimed this had happened to her, much less their response. His top aide, Melissa DeRosa, coming out and saying, they blaming the victims and saying, well, it doesn't stack up. I mean, she went, this is not Lindsey Boland. This is a different person. She just went about her business that day. She didn't suddenly, this was someone who was one of his executive assistants. She didn't act any different. She didn't come report it that day. I'm sorry. Wasn't the whole thing with Me Too and Time's Up and survivors that you don't blame the victim? But more than that, and I buy this, you don't say because someone didn't say something traumatic happened to them that day, or they went about acting like business as usual, that they're making it up. I mean, that's offensive. And I've long argued, don't blame a victim for not coming out and claiming they're a victim sooner. There's all kinds of reasons, people, not just with sexual assault. When my dad died, the day he died, I was supposed to go home the next day for Christmas. And I got the news that he died. And I went to the office Christmas party, and acted like nothing was wrong. Literally. And my boss asked me how things were going. I'm like, oh, fine. Well, I mean, my dad died today. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go home tomorrow. And he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, literally, I was in ultra denial. I wasn't okay that my dad died. I wasn't like indifferent. I was literally in this weird haze of denial. Like he did, but I was acting like I was good. It was fine. People do all kinds of weird things. One of them is when they're experience a complex or traumatic experience, they often don't know how to react. They don't know when to react. They may blame themselves. And we've seen that whole scenario. They may question, did it really happen? Did I'm part of this? You may, in a case of someone powerful like Cuomo, be like, if I say anything, will anyone even believe me? I mean, Andrew Cuomo was not just a governor of New York. He has a history of being a ruthless enforcer of loyalty. You go up against him, he is going to cut you off at the knees, then at the waist, then at the neck. There's going to be pieces of you left lying around. And that's it. And yet, they literally came out and said, these accusers, their stories this woman's story doesn't stack up. Why didn't she say anything sooner? Where was Me Too and Time's Up screaming bloody friggin' murder? And I'm not picking on the goals of Me Too and Time's Up or the people who are genuinely invested in that cause. I'm pointing out that it got weaponized and politicized. And when you weaponize and politicize something like that, what happens? You end up, people start looking at it cynically. It doesn't help the movement for sexual survivors, the people who are victims of sexual abuse, harassment. It doesn't deflate the power. It makes people think it's hyper politicized. It makes them question whether or not things really happen. It makes them discredit the whole thing when it's a legitimate problem in our society, and particularly when it comes to men in power. Okay. So let me play a couple clips that strung together of the way various media people talked about Andrew Cuomo after when he was dealing with COVID, and he'd won an Emmy. We'll talk about that in a second, and gotten a big book deal for how to lead in times of crisis. Check out what they were saying about him a year ago.
Governor Cuomo out there day after day after day, everything Trump isn't, honest, direct, brave.
Even lifelong Republicans tell me, they look at Cuomo and they're like, God, there's a leader.
For those of you who've been wondering why New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been garnering the nickname America's Governor, I think you saw it right there. He is conveying incredible strength in the face of this pandemic.
Maybe Trump is just a little bit mad that Governor Cuomo has become a kind of acting president.
I hope you are able to appreciate what you did in your state and what it means for the rest of the country now, and what it will always mean to those who love and care about you the most.
So here's the thing, and I'm not saying you can't give Andrew Cuomo credit for how he handled the leadership during the pandemic, but two things. One, an Emmy. Remember, he got an Emmy? He got an Emmy. The Academy gave him an Emmy for what? Best role as a governor? I mean, first of all, Emmys go to actors. So it's a little ironic because they gave him an Emmy for his great performance, best performance as a sitting governor. But it's not a performance. It's supposed to be real. But really, was it? I mean, is that who he was? It was kind of a performance. But did he even accepted the Emmy at the time? I was like, forget about the absurdity and just the nauseating nature of them giving him an Emmy. How about you give it to the frontline workers? But did he took it? How about you go, I'm not taking an Emmy from you guys because I'm not on TV performing like an actor. I'm trying to save my state in the middle of a pandemic. So thank you, but take your Emmy and go home. Oh, no, he took that Emmy, got a $5 million book deal. But here's the point. Andrew Cuomo was not, by the way, how come the nursing home thing got so buried still? It took allegations of sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct, whichever of them are true, and some of them are. Maybe all of them, but certainly some of them are, to bring him down. It didn't take him hiding data about nursing home deaths. It didn't take him covering it up. His top leadership basically acknowledging they hid the numbers so that the Department of Justice wouldn't know. That wasn't enough. That thousands and thousands of people died in nursing homes because he locked them in there. How about you impeach him for that? How about he resign for that? But that became the sub story. That's interesting. But Andrew Cuomo was never the god they made him out to be. I said before, I met Andrew Cuomo years ago. A guy I started an organization when we were young 20-somethings and built a huge political organization called Lead or Leave, and kind of were at the top of the Gen X sort of political movement. Went and worked for Andrew Cuomo. I met as his chief of staff when he was a cabinet member of Clinton's administration. I met Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo was an a-hole from day one. I walked through Robert Kennedy's house, Hickory Hill, when Andrew Cuomo was married to Carrie Kennedy, and watched him sitting at the kitchen table with the family, with Ethel Kennedy, the widow of Robert F. Kennedy, and watched him mock everybody, watched him mock his little brother, watched him mock me, watched him mock his mother-in-law, calling her a drunk. Well, maybe she was. She lost a lot. Maybe it was tough to lose your husband in assassination and your brother-in-law in assassination and have that spotlight on you. I'm thinking that was pretty tough. But either way, you're literally humiliating her in front of strangers, me, like in the house. That's who the guy was. But here's my point. That's not a new revelation. It may be a new revelation to some of you out there. Some people watching may be like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about him. Okay, but it wasn't a revelation to anybody who worked around him. Wasn't a revelation to anybody in national politics. Wasn't a revelation to anyone in New York politics. Wasn't a revelation to anyone in the Democratic Party at any level at all, above I'm not saying people in Iowa, city council members, in Cincinnati knew that. But anybody in national politics and everyone in the national media who covered politics and everyone in New York media knew it. And now when he resigned, all of a sudden all these stories come out saying, he'd done this for years. Everyone knew it. He had tons of enemies. How come those stories never came out before? Would everyone just sit on it? Everyone just sat on the fact that this guy ran the most toxic work environment on the planet, and everyone knew and everyone looked the other way, including propping him up, like elevating him as a god. Why? Why did they do that? Why did they look the other way? Is it just pure politics? Yes and no. It's politics for sure. He was a Democratic governor. The media is more liberal than conservative in the mainstream. Democratic operatives aren't going to go after a Democrat. I get all that. I don't get the Time's Up and the Me Too movement part. But it's more than just that. It's more than just politics. There's something almost toxic about how we've become a culture where we demonize certain people and we make gods of others, and it's binary. We won't move. And by the way, why did they all turn on him all of a sudden? It's not as simple as just there was nothing they could do. He had to go down, because the truth is they could have rallied behind him just like they'd done before. I think the Democratic Party was done with him. I think the irony is that Andrew Cuomo got skewered by the very party he rose up in. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were like, she's like, I'm going to run for president. Joe Biden isn't. I'm going to run next term. I don't want Andrew Cuomo running against me. Letitia James, the attorney general, she wants to be governor. I think there was a movement inside the Democratic Party going, we want to get rid of Andrew Cuomo because he's a threat, because he could be the next rising star, and we don't want him to rise that high. And now we have a chance to take him down. That's how ruthless, dirty, shameless politics is. It's got nothing to do with you. It's got nothing to do with people. Just like Time's Up really wasn't about the victims of sexual assault. I'm not saying that isn't what they said they were about. And I'm not saying they aren't actually at some level and people involved care about that. But as a whole, from the leadership, it was always a partisan divide. It was always aimed one way for one purpose. Weaponizing that to take down conservatives and Republicans. And that discredits what it was really about. And the fact that people buy into that on both sides is scary. Because the one side, it discredits what its movement is about and should be about. And the other side just buys into it 100% and goes, no, it's good, without seeing the hypocrisy of it's good if you do it consistently, if you do it to everyone. So on that note, I want to shift gears a little bit, because there's a sidebar to this, or another parallel to this, which is what's happening in the COVID space. We're doing the same thing we're doing in politics around COVID. I've said COVID, the pandemic, got politicized. Yes, everything has gotten politicized. In the political model in this country, the left, right, all or nothing, binary approach, take down your opponents. Things are good or bad. It's all or nothing. It's extreme. I defriend you if you're not on my camp, is also spread to COVID and everything else. It makes sense in a weird way, because it's so permeated our culture. The political, the sort of the nauseating cultural political divide has taken over everything. So when it comes to COVID, something very interesting is going on. We are experiencing another wave. No question. The Delta variant is on fire. It is happening. It is spreading. It's contagious. That's not to be disputed. Nor is it to dispute that the first wave of COVID was incredibly devastating. But if you say that, and yet you challenge whether we handled COVID the right way, did lockdowns work? Were masks as effective as we said? Sure, masks work in some scenarios, but masks became a sort of a protect-all, you know? That trucker, I think both parties are dead. I stopped voting years ago. I agree with you. Both parties are dead, but here's my problem with that. They are dead, but they're still toxic. It's like they're dead, but they haven't stopped affecting us. They're still in control. You can stop voting. I get it. You can say the parties suck. They're useless. But they're in power. They have control. They make decisions. They are affecting our lives. You know, they did a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. I think we need infrastructure. I'm for it. 30 years ago, we should have been doing infrastructure. They're going to try and pass a $3.5 trillion package of other things. Guys, some of those projects and programs may be necessary, but we're going to add another $4 trillion of debt. It's already, we've got 30 trillion. We're going to add like another 10%. And we're infusing that money into an economy that has too many people are saying we can't find enough workers. Meanwhile, we have inflation, which is essentially a tax on every worker out there, raises the cost of everything. You are in an economy that if you infuse tons of money into an economy that's in a great recession or a depression. When you infuse tons of money, like $3 trillion from the government into an economy that's actually overheated, that has too many employers not able to get workers, it's already inflationary, you risk blowing the whole thing up and screwing the middle class and the working class across the board. It's not a slight thing. It's not about wanting to do certain good things. It's about smart choices. And yet they're going to make those decisions and could well do those things. So both parties may be dead. They're broken, but they're toxic and powerful. And because we look away, we hurt ourselves. The COVID debate, to come back to that, the COVID debate is interesting because we've created an environment where you can't have an honest conversation about COVID. You have to buy one line or the other. Either it's a hoax, the whole thing is bad, vaccinations are all bad, and everything they did was a conspiracy theory to take us over. And there may be some elements of truth in any of that. To the other side, everything the government said is true. We followed the science. Everything we said and done and changed was only because we were following the science. Dr. Fauci is literally like a god. And everything the Democratic administration has done and Joe Biden has done is for the good of the country. Everything Democratic governors did was for the good of the country. It was all the right moves. We made the right moves. And if you resist them, if you go against them, it's misinformation. Even to the fact of worrying about where the virus came from, which you shouldn't be worried about because that's not important. I'm not sure why. And by the way, it probably didn't come from a lab. Why not? And why can't we know that? And why? So you're not allowed to even ask questions. You're not allowed to wonder. You're not allowed to ask. You're not allowed to put out data that questions these things. You're not allowed to go, should we vaccinate pregnant women? I don't know. Sure, it's safe. Of course you can. See it all the time. Every GYN's telling you OBGYN, go ahead, it's safe. You don't know that. I'm not spewing misinformation. Do you know they never tested pregnant women in any of the drug trials? They're starting to now for the vaccines. Pregnant women weren't in the tests. Why not? Because pregnant women are generally not in drug trial tests because they are not a good category of person to put in because pregnancies are so complex. So many things can go wrong that if you put a pregnant woman in a drug trial test as part of the general drug trial community, they may have an adverse effect or something may happen to their pregnancy, and it's not really because of the drug trial. There's so many unknown variables, you keep them out. You might do a separate trial just with pregnant women, which they're doing. They're not in the general trials. They never tested it on pregnant women. So how do they know it's safe? Well, they just do. But here's the point. I want to show you something because Rand Paul, and you can like him or hate him, but Rand Paul got banned on Twitter for saying masks don't work and citing two peer-reviewed studies in medical journals that challenged the utility of a cloth mask, just a basic cloth. He was saying this cloth mask you buy in a store doesn't really work. Maybe an N95 does, but those cloth masks don't. He challenged it with two peer-reviewed studies, and Twitter pulled him down. But here's what's interesting. Twitter pulled him down for saying it's misinformation. But I want to show you something that happened on CNN, and this is an interesting one. This is where I'm going to kind of wrap things up tonight in a minute. But this is Anderson Cooper, and again, Anderson Cooper can be a good journalist when he wants to be, but this is Anderson Cooper with Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan, if you know, is a well-known journalist, activist. He's liberal, but he has some libertarian views. And he also has been living, he was one of the first openly gay writers, mainstream political writers, 25 years ago. And he's been living with HIV for decades. And Anderson Cooper asks him about, well, let me show you these series of what he wrote in his Substack first. Kratzy, can we pop those three things up from the Substack? Yes, I'll wear a mask indoors if I'm legally required or politely asked, but I don't really see why anyone should. In a free society, once everyone has access to a vaccine that overwhelmingly prevents serious sickness and death, there's no reason to enforce lockdowns again, or mask mandates, or social distancing any longer. In fact, there's every reason not to. That's Andrew Sullivan in the Weekly Dish. Why isn't his Twitter account being pulled down? But here, listen to this. This is him explaining to Anderson Cooper, who raises the question, but shouldn't we be worried about the immunocompromised? Shouldn't we be worried about children who can't be vaccinated? And they had a very interesting conversation. They're clearly friends, which is why, and I like seeing these kinds of conversations because Anderson Cooper pushes back, but he actually lets him have a point of view. And here's Andrew Sullivan's response to the kid thing.
Millions of Americans who cannot be vaccinated, we're talking about, immunocompromised or children under the age of 12, shouldn't a society like ours do what they can to protect those who are defenseless?
Yes, we should. And I certainly think we should vaccinate each other and be vaccinated. But the risk is really very small to children. If you're 18 times more likely to drown if you're ages 1 to 5 than to die of COVID. And I think putting it in some sort of perspective for children, which is it's not that serious a disease at all. It's like a bad cold.
Whoa! Where are the Twitter police? He just went on CNN and said COVID's like a bad cold, and it's not that dangerous for children. And you're 18 more likely times to die of drowning. Rand Paul got yanked for saying masks aren't effective. If you just go in the store and buy a cloth mask, not very effective. 2 peer-reviewed studies. Twitter gives him a week suspension. It's so much a double standard. By the way, I am glad Anderson Cooper let Andrew Sullivan come on and have that conversation. My whole point is we should be having those conversations. And you're not lying or full of misinformation if you come out and say what Andrew Sullivan said. But could you imagine if Ron DeSantis said that, how the media would go crazy if Governor of Florida said that? But he came right out, and Andrew Sullivan is one smart dude. I mean, you want to read his stuff. He is intellectual times 10. That guy's got a brain like huge. But he makes a simple point. Kids aren't that at risk. It's like a bad cold. Now, someone can argue that, and a lot of people are saying that's not true, but a lot of doctors, a lot of people in the medical community are saying that is true. Kids aren't affected by it the same way. And the fact that we, can't have that debate without one side being silenced as misinformation, and again, I'm happy CNN's allowing it to happen, and I'm happy Andrew Sullivan didn't get his Twitter feed shut down. But I'm not happy that Rand Paul did. And that if one side, the more conservative side, makes those arguments, they're banned, they're labeled as misinformation. When in fact, it's a conversation we need to have. There is information and arguments to be made on both sides. What I will end with is this. The fact that CNN is starting to have that conversation is significant. They have been holding on forever for the last year and a half to one side of a narrative. And I've argued Fox News, CNN, two sides, and MSNBC are the two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same narrative-driven coin and corporate media-driven coin. And nothing populist about it and nothing really bringing a wide range of perspectives. They got a narrative, they drive that narrative. But CNN's shifting. And the reason they're shifting even just a little is because we are seeing people are getting tired. They are getting tired, not just to COVID, not just to the pandemic. They are starting to distrust the government. Our government has screwed itself in a sense by not being fully transparent, by not giving fully transparent information. Maybe their motives were good, maybe their motives were bad, but they weren't fully transparent. They haven't allowed in social media platforms and big tech and whoever not allowing for a free flow of information, but deciding what is and isn't. The fact checkers, by the way, who's checking the fact checkers? By doing that, more and more people, not just conservatives, not just on the right, more and more people legitimately from all perspectives pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, people who want vaccines, people who get vaccines, people who are pro-COVID vaccines, people across the spectrum are going, I don't know what to believe anymore, and I need to know more. That's a good thing. And it's also a sign that a shift is happening, but it's a bad thing for those who want to continue to control information. And if the Biden administration was smart, they would get out in front of this and shift gears and go, we are not going to just be another version of Trump, just telling our truth. We are going to, because that's what Trump did. We are going to allow for a genuine dialogue and a conversation. We are not going to fight it. We are not going to run our political agenda. Failure to do that is going to screw them. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The midterm elections right now in 2022 are going to go Republican at the rate we're going. But if they were smart, they would acknowledge and start allowing a conversation and get off their pedestals and stop saying everything we say is true and allow a genuine free flow of information. But the fact is, more and more people of all political persuasions want this. More and more people are going, I don't trust the government anymore. And that's the problem. When a government in a free society starts telling you what is truth and what isn't, and what you can say and what you can't say, and the social media tech platforms getting on board that, it ultimately makes everyone, whatever their politics, distrustful of the information and where it's coming from. That's a scary and bad thing, but it's a good thing that people are starting to wake up and realize that. I'm Rob Nelson. Thanks for watching.